Thank you all for joining us. We're excited to see you again. If we haven't met yet, I'm Rachel Robinson, the Vice President of MassMEDIC, and have enjoyed every minute of chatting with you all and having virtual programming over the last few months. I know it's been a bit of a whirlwind, and we are so thrilled that you as a community keep coming out and joining us for what we hope are informative and helpful programs. I know we are getting a lot out of them, so I really hope that you all are as well. So just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. We do have two incredible speakers, and in order to make the experience wonderful for them, we ask you to keep yourself on mute and make sure that there's no background noise coming in. We know it does happen, but just try to keep an eye on your mute button to make sure that we don't have any distractions. Also, we absolutely encourage questions and interaction, right? This is a community that wants to chat about different topics. So please feel free to use the chat button in the bottom of your screen to type in questions throughout. We will be doing Q&A at the end of the presentations, but we'll also try to intersperse some Q&A in the middle. So at any point, feel free to type a question in, and then we'll make sure that we get it to our speakers. So unless there are any questions or anything else from the audience or Bryan, I think what we'll do is just kick things off with an introduction of our speakers. We do have a really great program, so I want to make sure we leave a lot of time for discussion and Q&A at the end. Our two speakers today, Bryan Lord and David Keifer, are from two of our fantastic member companies, Pristine Surgical and Boston Scientific. And when we sat down to talk about this, we asked them to think about single use in hospital now and in the future, right? There's been a lot of talk during COVID, especially about reducing the infection rates and how we can prevent the spread of preventable diseases. And I think single use in hospital is something that's going to be a really big topic moving forward. And luckily, these two members have already been taking this on. So I think I will start with Bryan Lord. I would love if you would take over and share a little bit about what Pristine has been doing.
All right, can everybody see my screen?
Looks good.
Great. So I know by tradition, folks start with a bunch of niceties. I actually am gonna start with a bone to pick with MassMEDIC and with Boston Scientific. Here's a story that came out in Boston.com just the other day, and look at this. A local forest was identified as the best in America for its beauty. You wanna know where that local forest was? In New Hampshire, a local forest. So here's Boston, folks. Here's where we are in Manchester, and you wanna know where the White Mountains are? They're way up there, and you call this local. So I want to once and for all wonder and ask you guys, are we in the club or are we not in the club? Are you just going to pick and choose the White Mountains, or are you going to include all of us, like the medical device cluster that goes up to Manchester as well? But delighted to be here with you. We're glad to be part of MassMEDIC as well, all kidding aside. So I'm going to talk about Pristine Surgical. You see our corporate headquarters here. And one more snarky remark to start. Yes, there are buildings above 2 stories north of 495. So there you go. There's proof for all of you down south. So let's move on to actually serious stuff. So I'm delighted to be here, delighted to be part of MassMEDIC. Thanks everybody for being on today. I'm going to just give a little bit of a background. You all probably by being here know about minimally invasive surgery and about something about single-use devices, but I'll just do a little setup. I'll talk about what we're doing in Pristine and then pick up on what Rachel talked about in terms of single use and kind of the value prop going forward. So minimally invasive surgical visualization systems today, this is an example of an arthroscopic tower, are expensive. You can spend as much as $100,000 for a tower today, and they're complicated. There's about 12 different components that all have to be orchestrated together and be in fine tip-top working order. The state of the art on our side of the equation, David's going to talk about flexible endoscopy. We really look at this on the rigid endoscopy side of things. The workhorse tool is the item on the top here, the rod lens arthroscope, which is aptly named. It's a stainless steel rod with about 10 to 12 lenses that provides what some people call the telescope to look inside the joint. So it's a complex system. And with that complex system that people describe as a durable or a reusable device, there's additional service and sterilization burden that's really borne by the providers, by our customers. So we think that single use is really a solution to this, as the topic of the conversation is at hand. We also believe, as you touched on, Rachel, and talk about it a little bit more, is that in a post-COVID world, infection control is king. This is something we've been thinking about for a while, but certainly 7 billion people now are thinking about infection control, unfortunately, on a daily basis. So let me just introduce you to the single-use surgical visualization system that we're building at Pristine. I'll show you each of the component parts. The component part starts with a single-use kit. So everything that is contained or that is used in the sterile field in an operating room environment is contained in our single-use visualization kit. So there's a tie-back cover. The tech simply opens that up, plugs the device in, and all of the ancillary equipment and the tubing and cabling that's necessary comes in that kit. This is our first introductory product, which is a single-use arthroscope. So we use chip-in-a-tip technology. We have a high-definition image sensor, high-brightness LED, all located on the tip of the device, which is our belief in what the best design configuration is for single-use visualization in our environment. That device plugs in sort of a classic razor blade modality into a box that we uncleverly call our image processing unit, or IPU. So this conducts high performance image processing. It's really compact, easy to use, low cost, but it's also Wi-Fi connected. And we Wi-Fi connect because we've also built a complementary cloud-based software platform that we call Pristine Connect, that really provides 3 different areas of functionality for us. One is some telehealth capability, 2, efficiency enhancing software tools that really, like the hardware, the tools on the software side also provide efficiency enhancement for surgeons, the techs, and for patients. And then the third is logistics support. So to summarize really what we focus on in a couple of short bullets, we do 3 things really and try to achieve 3 things with our single-use platform. One is to increase patient safety. The second is to improve economics and efficiency. And the third is really to advance the state of the art and continue to advance the state of the art. So I'm just going to touch on each of those going forward, but it's important to note, these are 3 items that we've been working on since the founding of the company, but really in particular, the improving of the economics and efficiency and the increasing patient safety really are part of that, sort of key post-COVID new normal as well. And so there's a real increased focus, we think, on the value prop around single use. So from a patient safety perspective, of course, it's understood that these devices are 100% sterile from the factory. So we're able to reduce instances of infection and infection risk around that. We also think that we can reduce cross-contamination risk by limiting OR access. And we do that through the inventory management process and through the telehealth. So way back in 2018, before anybody knew what COVID was about, people were talking about, gosh, we got all these people kind of revolving door going in and out of the operating room. Is that really a good thing? And that certainly is questions that SPD professionals are asking today in our current environment. The second thing we're focused on is improving economics and efficiency. So from an economics perspective, we've done some cost calculation about what the comparable cost is per procedure for a durable device. It's significant. There's sterilization, CapEx, and service cost. So our goal is to do 2 things: to really reduce the overall cost on a per procedure basis, and then to also improve the economics and really move more towards a variable cost type of model as well. And certainly when we talk about absolute cost savings, it goes without saying that we're also improving efficiency as well. So if we can take those 35 process steps and replace them with an open of a tie-back cover, we improve the efficiency of the procedure, and that's really coin of the realm, particularly in ambulatory surgery centers. So we talk a lot about the value prop in very simple kind of colloquial terms, that you get a new scope every procedure. And that's, that's sort of fundamentally what the offering is for, in particular, surgeons and techs around single-use devices. We've done some focus group testing, a bunch of quotes around problems that you have with the incumbent technology. And when people talk about image quality, there's stuff to talk about. I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, but we also think about image quality over time. What's your image quality look like when you've used this device in the field 20, 30, 40 times? You can have perfect LASIK eye surgery, but if you've got dirty eyeglasses, it doesn't really matter. Your lens is occluded. So we think about new scope every time in really two fashions from a single-use perspective. One is clean, but the other is something that we kind of refer to colloquially as future-proofing. So if you go out, and we've all done this, you go, it's 2011, you buy your C300 Canon EOS camera, whatever that is, 2012 comes out, darn it, the C500 just came out. So we're able to actually, through single use, another thing that sort of gets overlooked is that the value prop of single use is that you future-proof the purchase by having the latest, greatest technology in each of those packages that you open up. So I'm going to talk about that just a little bit more to give a little peek for the technologist in the group here about how we go about doing that. So today, the way that we work on the digital imaging is really very similar to the way that the marketplace that we're all familiar with has shifted from 35 millimeter, even digital SLRs to smartphones. And we've done the same thing. This is where the camera resides on a durable rod lens scope device, and we've put our camera at the tip. So we track our visualization capability in part with Moore's Law. Bryce Klontz gave a good presentation, I think it was for a MassMEDIC event several weeks or maybe a month ago, and talked about the ability of companies to actually take technologies from the consumer electronics space. They're really driven by consumer purchasing advancements and by Moore's Law, and apply them into the medical field. And we're doing exactly the same thing. I thought Bryce's presentation was spot on. And if you think about those capabilities that are present today, this was a 4th of July picture I took of the Big Dipper with my cell phone. Like, it's incredible, the kind of technology that you can use. And so we're doing some of the same thing. We're doing some, we're also, in addition to doing hardware improvements, we're using software. We're using software to advance the visualization that you see in our device. And as I touched on, we're using software to be deployed in the Pristine Connect platform as well, very much like the software that you see resident in the cloud or active on your smartphone. I touched a little bit about the automated inventory management. So there's software that we can do to enhance the performance for the surgeon and for the tech and for the patient. But also, frankly, we get some benefit out of that too, because we manage inventory control through that platform as well. And I'm going to come back full circle and sort of conclude my comments about some of the really fantastic things about being in this sort of digital single-use environment. Touch a little echoes of the comments about future-proofing. When you're in a digital single-use environment, you've got multiple tools for our technologists to be able to use. Lots of different fast innovation and fast production of new product offerings that we can offer both with hardware in our tool set and software in our tool set. So quickly behind the arthroscope that I showed you, we'll be introducing a single-use laparoscope that can be used in a surgical environment. You can also use that in a diagnostic environment. And really beyond that, a little peek into the future as well. We're doing some work thinking about rigid flex, moving more towards the direction that Boston Scientific is in, where we can do some flexibility of the tip. And also where we can look at things like stereoscopic imaging by locating 2 cameras on the tip of the device as well. All of these are enabled because you're in an environment that really utilizes digital hardware and digital software as your toolbox. And come full circle, we focus on the 3 core items: increasing patient safety, improving economics and efficiency, advancing the state of the art with those tools in our tool belt. And we think that's part of the fun of the work and the innovation that we're able to do here at Pristine.
That was awesome, Bryan. Thank you. Now, I do want to make sure, Shirley, I see your question in the chat bot. That is definitely something we're going to talk about in our discussion. So let's hold that one. Shirley made a point about the environmental opportunities, and I know that's something that both groups are going to want to talk about. So let's hold that for the Q&A section at the end. David Keifer, I would love to turn it over to you at this point to talk about what Boston Scientific is doing, and then we'll come back together for a discussion.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Bryan. I actually learned a lot. That was great to listen to. And Interesting thing is there's so many similarities between what Bryan just discussed and what I'm going to share here. So I'm going to try to make sure I don't double dip too much here. But I did want to give a very high level, and by the way, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this group. I'm really looking forward to it. I did want to give a quick high level overview about who we are as Boston Scientific Endoscopy. I think a lot of folks know Boston Scientific. And the endoscopy division is kind of like the little brother to the cardiac division. Although I've been in the company now for close to 11 years, and I do feel like the endoscopy division is making some huge inroads in that space. But our focus has been single use really since the beginning. We were the first company to launch a single use biopsy forceps. We launched our first single use camera technology back in 2007. And have launched a couple of them since then, including in different spaces. Our first one was in cholangioscopy, which is the imaging of the common bile duct. We've got scopes in urology now. And then, of course, the product that I'll talk to you about here, which is our first single-use duodenoscope. But overall, in the endoscopy space, we focus on natural orifice access to diagnosis and to therapy. So the overarching goal, and really I think this is across all of Boston Scientific, is how do we make these procedures easier and safer by using natural orifice or minimally invasive techniques to treat diseases that might have required an open surgery in the past. And therefore, we're saving patients the harm and the time of long recoveries, or also saving from an economic standpoint. So, and then trying to make sure that we have equivalent outcomes. So our most recent, I guess, intro into this area, beyond the spaces that we talk about here on this slide, pancreatic biliary disease, GI bleeding, pulmonary diseases, is this infection prevention space. We acquired a company out in Georgia about 2015-16 timeframe called EndoChoice, and they had this entire platform of products dedicated to how do we clean these scopes after every single procedure and make sure that patient A, B, C, and D are always being treated with the cleanest possible scope. And that really kickstarted a lot of our internal discussions around the concept of how do we make a single-use scope? If the reusable scopes have challenges being washed, how do you identify a technology that completely eliminates that need for washing? So I'm going to go through a couple of these slides here, and we can talk through some of the thoughts that went into the development. But the device that we launched this year is EXALT Model D. So it's the world's first single-use duodenoscope. And it goes back to answering that chief question. How can we reliably clean endoscopes, and specifically duodenoscopes, after every single procedure? And a duodenoscope is very unique in the space of imaging platforms. It's got some complicated mechanisms at the tip of the scope that allow for access during a procedure called ERCP. And the access is basically perpendicular to your view. So your camera and you have an articulation elevator, everything is working at a 90-degree angle. So it's a very, very complicated device. And in a couple of slides, I'll walk you through, essentially the last decade has been fraught with challenges in reprocessing, and has unfortunately actually led to a lot of patients getting sick and some patient deaths, lawsuits, and a lot of very negative press around a procedure, the ERCP procedure, which is an absolutely necessary and life-saving technology. And our chief design goal with this, for those of you that might be familiar with the space or have experience in endoscopy or in ERCP, is to create a product that essentially looks and feels just like the scope that a physician uses every day today. In an absolute perfect world, we could Folgers coffee test it, and they wouldn't know the difference. That's not the case in reality, but that's the goal. We want to try to get as close as we can to the look, feel, fit, function of the device that they're using today. And so as you're looking at this image here, everything from, and I think my mouse might be showing up on the screen. If it's not, the processor's there in the back of the image, everything along that teal umbilicus, all the way down that the working channel and the insertion tube of the scope is single use. So it's disposed of every single time. And I did see that question come up on the environment. And I think that's a fantastic question. And I know we'll address that in the Q&A portion. So the neat thing is this is not a theoretical technology now. We launched this device in January of this year. We have conducted a clinical trial, actually 2 clinical trials already, and we're in the middle of another one. And overall, we're getting really strong feedback on the performance of the device. This was published earlier this year, and 97% of the procedures that were performed were successful using this device. And the interesting thing about these procedures that were performed out of this 60 case series is that they were what we call consecutive case series. So we couldn't cherry pick the easiest cases that came in. Whatever came in the door Monday morning for the entire length of those procedures at those 6 sites had to be treated, unless there was some anatomy that would discount the patient from being treated. So all in all, we're really excited about the overall performance of the device and the initial clinical results. So this gets back into the why. So everyone, when I have these conversations with physicians and different folks about why a duodenoscope, because it is a relatively niche procedure in the case of all of endoscopy. If you think of colonoscopies, we have lots of estimates of the number, but duodenoscopes are 2 to 3% of that total number. It's a very small number. It's in a major state of transition right now. The duodenoscopes themselves have gotten more complex. They're more difficult to clean. The reusable companies that make them have done really nice jobs trying to improve those designs, but ultimately we feel it's very, very difficult to effectively clean them every time. And I'll reference some data that the FDA actually is publishing right now. The other question is, we never really used to have these problems 20 years ago. Why is this an issue today? And that's the beyond endoscopy. This is a worldwide health issue of these multi-drug resistant organisms where the antibiotics that we've been using have effectively made stronger bugs, the ones that can survive. And this is a complicated topic that touches a lot of different spaces, but specific to duodenoscopes, if these drugs or if these bugs can survive through the reprocessing cycle, it becomes a very, very challenging thing to clean off. And then the patients that are being treated are in some cases the sickest of the sick, and they have a very difficult time fighting off those diseases. And then auditing and personnel. So this is a challenging piece where you have folks that are cleaning these scopes. You have to be regularly trained. Occasionally you get turnover, and it is a very physically demanding, difficult job to clean scopes all day. And so those folks, they don't always stay there for a long, long time to build up that expertise. So, all in all, the 5 reasons you see on the screen is sort of why we chose duodenoscopes as opposed to working on some other imaging areas. This is just a brief timeline, and I certainly will not drain this, but this is going back to September of 2013, where this information about duodenoscope safety really came to the forefront. There's been 12 safety communications on duodenoscopes in that time frame, which actually makes it #1 of all medical devices for the number of safety communications that have come out. And so it's creating a story, and it's very clearly articulating that a fix has to be made. And there are many solutions and many different ways to fix the problem. But we do feel that a single-use duodenoscope is sort of the ultimate solution. It's the one that has the absolute least risk of causing any more harm, or not causing any more harm, but potentially making it a less effective fix. There's other economic impacts as well. So Bryan talked about this in his discussion. We see that as well in ours. So in the space of reusable duodenoscopes, there are capital costs, there's repairs, the cost of reprocessing. More lately, the cost of training and compliance is probably very much underclubbed. Staff exposure. The staff exposure piece has become absolutely elevated to a very, very high level in the last few months during the COVID situation. There's no evidence that you can't clean coronavirus COVID off of any of these scopes. But the concern that we've had with some of our hospital customers is that, or concern that's been raised by them is, what if I have a patient that is COVID positive and then we have to go and wash that scope? Is that exposure to my staff something I should be concerned about? And that's definitely something that's being studied and explored right now. And then obviously, of course, the costs of litigation, which are certainly not zero. Senate's been involved. Again, I won't belabor this one, but they've completed an investigation specifically into duodenoscopes. And the reason I share all of this is, this just kind of further cements the reason that we actively went after duodenoscopes as our first major single-use endoscope, as opposed to some of the other ones. But ultimately, the Senator Murray's investigation found that even when they're following the guidelines perfectly, there has been outbreaks. And right now, the concern is that they're underreported. So a lot of areas for challenges and just for problems to arise. So the FDA actually conducted a post-market surveillance study. So the FDA actually asked the 3 major endoscope manufacturers to go out and study their own efficacy of the reprocessing cycle. And 5% is kind of the number. About 5% of the scopes that they surveyed came back with what we would call high concern organisms. So those multi-drug resistant organisms are included in that list. Things that may cause patient harm. And these are now on clean, ready-to-use scopes. So these numbers are high. The study was designed for 0.4%. That was sort of the expected return rate. So it came out at 13 times higher, which of course caused a lot of concern. And we don't have to go too much more into these slides, but this just kind of further explains that we are seeing these come through, and this is a little outdated at this point, about 2018, but we have seen a continued supply of some of these issues over time. So yeah, I wanted to give a very high-level overview of kind of why we decided to get into duodenoscope space, and I guess Rachel, I can turn it back to you, and we can go into some questions or how you'd like to proceed.
So I'm going to take over. This is Brian Johnson. Nice to, thanks gentlemen for joining us today. So I'm going to start reading up. We've got a lot of questions coming in on the chat. So I think it's best to kind of start with these. And we had a couple about environmental impact, and clearly, there's a question here of whether or not the innovation and the impact of reducing infections and how that sort of weigh that with potential environmental impact. So can we dig a little bit into environment in terms of what happens after the single-use devices are used? How is it disposed of? And that sort of scenario. Let's jump into that discussion if we could. Either of you gentlemen can start there.
Brian, I've just been talking. You want to go first?
Sure. All right. Let me, I do have a slide. Let me pop that up here. There we go. So appreciate the question. We actually think that we reduce material use, believe it or not. So that may sound really like single use reduces material use. There's some studies, this is actually some screenshots from some studies that said, that looked at how much PPEs, chemicals, and waters were used through a sterilization process. It's significant. So you can't start from sort of an idea of, durable, reusable, and then single use and just conclude, from at first level, the analysis of, well, you must be putting more into the waste stream. This is literally screenshots of the study that showed the amount of PPE materials and chemicals and water that's used in the course of a sterilization process. So that's half of the equation. The other half of the equation is that, look, in fairness to the question, some surgery centers really, we know, right? It's about rapid turnaround time, and there is a lot of material that goes into the waste stream. We also, though, have partnered with a group that actually is world-class at doing what we call closed-loop medical waste recovery and recycling. So that's not actually capturing components and reusing them in that sort of fashion, trying to, sift out the image sensor and clean it off and stuff. It actually is about putting the waste stream into a LEEDS compliant recycling process. And so that's one of the features that we've added into our single-use platform, understanding the concern for the green side of the equation, that we actually believe that we've got a LEED certified green solution for our single-use device that actually removes the left side of the screen, but also addresses it through the right side as well.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add,
Simple.
and Brian, I think that was great. I could probably take that same slide and put the Boston Scientific logo on it, because we
I'll
are.
send it to you. It's all yours.
We're doing the exact same thing. So we're working very closely with some medical grade recyclers. The study I showed you, so our performance study that I talked about, that we did our 60 cases on, we presented that at a medical conference, and the very first question out of the panel had nothing to do with the study. It was environmental. So this has been a constant and consistent area of focus for us. So we know, just to Brian's point, the existing process is not environmentally neutral, and we're putting in processes in place, such as medical grade recycling, to help eliminate and reduce that burden on our customers as well. So overall, I think we can argue neutrality or potentially a reduction.
Yeah, another quick question about sort of environmental. I mean, so how does sterilization fit in within the kind of universe of single-use disposables? Does it eliminate the use of things like ethylene oxide and sterilization processes? Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that as well, because that came up in the chat.
No, so we do use ETO for our sterilization modality. So we do a mass ETO basically at the factory. So the devices and the packages, really the kits, come fully ETO sterile with the Tyvek covering that I talked about. And so we do that, in a controlled environment that specifically does use ETO, to your question. That's right.
Yeah, we do the same. We do industrial level ETO. We do it for a lot of products.
Right.
The one thing, so in response to the FDA's recommendations for duodenoscopes, some hospitals are actually doing local level ETO on the reusable devices. And there's a number of obviously concerns recently with ETO and carcinogens and all that. So we think with single use, we actually pull some of that out. And it's obviously done at the industrial level, but not every hospital has the ability to do that on site in their basement.
Great. Hey, Brian, as part of that question, also, one of our guests wanted you to elaborate a little bit on the integration of the telehealth model and the Pristine device.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing that a little bit more?
Yeah, no problem. So we have telehealth capability from the OR to the outside, one-to-one or one-to-many. And the way that we've configured that is really both text-based and video. So in some cases, it's not necessary to do video connection. In other cases, with a push of the button, you can do that. And so we've got that capability. As we all know, reps like to be in the OR and like to be up close and personal to the action that's going on. Our device is really designed to be plug and play simple. There isn't really the need, other than the sales, interest in the rep being there. To the extent that there's communication that is needed, that's a push button capability. And it really can be not only to rep or to tech, but also to anybody else that you would want to have in that communication in a phone book, basically.
Great. Here's a question that came in for David. How will the market evolve in terms of percentage from reprocessable to single-use endoscopes in the next 5 years? Are there any specific TAs that are set to see higher adoption in single-use devices?
So that's an interesting question. So 5 years is going to be difficult to answer. I think if we look at 20 years, I think we're looking at 100%. I just don't see an environment where we don't look back 20 years from now and say, wow, it's amazing that we were all using reusable stuff and we were washing them every time. And we saw that same thing happen in a couple of other areas that we watched move from reusable to single use. And I'm sure in other medical specialties, it's been the same. But the next 5 years, it's going to be, duodenoscopes, I think will, start to aggressively move that direction just due to the complexity. There's a number of companies that will be launching these. So we happen to be first, but we won't be the only one, probably within months, including the major reusable manufacturers. So my expectation is that the market starts to move quickly. But you have to remember that, especially in this procedure, I can't speak to other medical specialties, but in ERCP, a physician gets very used to the way their scope feels, and so it's not going to be necessarily an easy activity to move that market over.
Yeah, I'll add to that if you don't mind. I think that the ergonomics design, great point. We've thought about that very carefully as well. We want it to be drop into the surgeon's hand and really no distinction. This has been something that, frankly, folks, you talked about 2013, we've been at this for some time as well. And folks have wanted to have single-use technologies available to them. Many of the tool sets in an OR today are set up as single use. And so it's been sort of I don't know, holy grail is too strong a word, but it's been an ambition for to be able to deliver this type of visualization for some time. So it's not new in terms of the value prop or the need or the interest from the marketplace. It's really been a challenge in terms of the technology. We sort of, are challenged by the fact that sometimes we say, chip on a stick and sort of oversimplify. It's hard. The technology to get the level of visualization, the level of the integration with water and with lenses and with electronics and everything else together, and to be able to match the state of the art today or exceed it, is a non-trivial engineering challenge. And so in some respects, you can describe it as its time has finally matured, which is part of the answer. Well, why now? If you can take pictures of the Big Dipper with your iPhone, the technology is pretty spectacular. And so part of that is really about the maturity of the overall supply chain. We haven't gone out and fabricated our own chips. That would take a $500 million Intel fab to be able to do that. So it is about some of that, the convergence of a bunch of different technologies that allows us to be where we are today. Fortunately, we were crazy enough to start a while ago and have been the beneficiary of the convergence of those things. So we see it the same way. It's not a lot different than the way, if you remember, when digital cameras came out, everybody said, why the heck would I need this? The images are grainy, I get sort of all this sort of stuff. I'm very happy with my 35 millimeter camera. Well, then we step back and think, as that sort of enhancement has occurred and the capabilities are there, who wants to take film to the drugstore anymore to get developed, right? And so that's all rear view mirror. So same sort of thing. We expect these to be complementary products for quite some time, in a very sort of Clayton Christensen way, right? You see innovations come in, sometimes from the bottom end. We think the gap between our technologies is really indecipherable today, but that's not the way oftentimes new technologies are introduced, and eventually they eclipse and move on. So yeah, it'll be sort of an analog shift over time is the way we see it too.
Can I add a comment there? So I completely agree. I think the fact that we all have an iPhone in our pocket or advanced camera technology has absolutely made this possible. I do think that there is a potential benefit to unlocking the capital acquisition cycle. So at least in the space that I work in, the reusable devices are expensive. So $40,000, $50,000. If we can then, and so you buy it and you're kind of in that thing for the next 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is. That piece of technology was designed and is really not dramatically changed in the last 25 years. What single use allows you to do is unlock some customization options. Especially in gastroenterology, females have become a huge component and huge percentage of practicing physicians. That wasn't true 20 years ago. So different hand strength, different ergonomics, maybe different, you could either theoretically think of a world where everybody has a custom design handle right for their specific hand. So there are other benefits besides all the infection stuff that we've been talking about that single use, I think, unlocks that is really difficult to replicate in a reusable device.
Yeah, I would agree. Well said.
This is great, and there's a very robust set of questions. I'm hoping I can get through all of them because there's a lot coming in. In your experience, gentlemen, is the FDA requiring aging studies in all single-use devices, or is a simple justification based on materials packaging sufficient?
No, we do aging studies for sure. Yep.
Yeah, we do the same.
Okay. Do the single-use devices require manufacturing component materials that are limited in the global supply or only available from certain countries where supply could be suddenly restricted? Maybe you could dive into the supply chain question of this a little bit.
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I came actually out of the semiconductor industry when I got into the medical device world, and certainly coin of the realm in, and I think it's true here, is never to be single sourced. So, the good news is that that's certainly one, an expectation, and two, it's a capability. I mean, the global supply chain is unbelievable in terms of what the capabilities are. The likelihood of being single sourced in any one particular item, we're not in what we do. And, we're just a small sample set of what, the overall world sort of involves. So, that's not something I have a lot of worry about. I think, there is kind of a question, I think, in today's, political environment about exposure, perhaps to China and other things like that. We do most of our assembly domestically in the first place. Of course, when you're dealing with electronics, you deal with a worldwide supply chain. But, it's a very large worldwide supply chain at that. And those are all, frankly, very, very navigable. It's a fair question, but one that doesn't keep me up at night, given the robustness of the world and the supply chain that we live in.
Yeah, the only thing I would add on to that is I think customer demand is going to be more of the limiter than the supply chain. I think the supply chain in general, I think speaking in broad terms, is very well set up for these things can be molded parts, produced fairly easily. Of course, there's the camera technology that's a little bit more complicated, but I think customer demand coming on will underpace the supply chain capabilities for a while.
Okay, so I have a question for David, and then the next one's going to be for Bryan. So for David, is Boston Scientific, are you moving your reusable scope customers to disposable scopes? And then Bryan, I'm going to cue you up. In the sort of COVID, post-COVID world, are we going to see a bigger trend towards single-use versus reusable devices?
So I didn't quite so we just to clarify, we do not have any reusable scopes. We don't make reusable scopes. All of our only products are the single-use scope that we're just launching. But I do think that opens up the question of, are customers going to move completely over to single-use? And we talked to some of the challenges already, but what we're seeing in the early days, and we just started this in January, but we are seeing a mix. We're seeing some customers have made just complete conversions, and some customers some hospitals are using this technology only for the sickest of the sick type patients that couldn't fight off an infection as well as others. So we are seeing a segmented approach, but we personally do not make any of the reusable devices.
Yeah. And so, Bryan, the question was whether COVID is going to accelerate kind of shift to single use. I think so. I mean, I touched on that a bit in my comments and presentation. Obviously, it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. Nobody wants to be in the environment that we are, but there certainly is, accelerated interest in the world of single use. And I would say that's probably as a subset overall of sort of infection control, right? There's a whole sort of burgeoning kind of sterile tech kind of, effort that is understood. These are things that frankly should have been, I think, more relevant to people for a long time. David talked about antibiotic resistant bacteria. That's been something that, we all know, but sits sort of like the, tension on the San Andreas Fault, and people just sort of say, well, it's just a risk that I'll sort of deal with, but it's there. And it's certainly going to be a challenge as antibiotics become even more or less efficacious. So that's, though, been kind of in the background. And I think COVID sort of cast this really bright light on infection control and the criticality around that. And so we know that, look, this whole group, this whole audience knows the challenges that hospitals and surgery centers are facing for two things. One is disruption to the patient flow, but two is fear. So you've got sort of an actual issue, but then you also have a perception issue around contamination, and people are, as we all know, unfortunately not going to the hospital and surgery centers because they're concerned about the contaminations. So there's a perception issue that is equal, if not as large as the, actual contamination mitigation challenges. So yeah, we do think that both of those things are certainly, consistent with our value prop that we're working on.
Great, thank you. Still plenty of questions coming in here. What's the best place to find studies that show the neutral environment impact or lower costs for single use? Bryan, do you have a place where they can find that?
Send me an email, blord@pristinesurgical.com. I'll give you a link to it. It's somewhere in my Dropbox folder.
Okay. David, there's a couple questions coming in, and Bryan, you can definitely jump in here too. Is there a way to make sure that people aren't reusing single-use devices?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and certainly a concern when we look at globally where we're going to launch the product. There's certain global markets that are more prone to reuse on some of our other devices. The kind of natural intent of this device is single use, so we do expect that the majority of folks are going to buy it for that specific reason. Otherwise, economically, it may not make sense. In the existing cleaning processes, you would most likely destroy the scope if you were to try to wash it in the correct manner. Some of the circuitry is exposed, and so I would not expect it to last after one case if it was tried to wash correctly.
Yeah, so we address that head on two ways. One is that we've got componentry that's designed to fail in autoclave so that you can't run it through. Our device needs to be actually submersible in water in an arthroscopic environment, so we have to deal with that. That's an issue that we engineer to be compatible with water. We think about autoclave on the one hand and then software. So our devices have to be paired appropriately, and we have software that talks back and forth, and so software limits the reusability of the device.
Here's a question for Boston Scientific. Would you expect to see an increase of capsule endoscopes for single-use procedures?
A capsule endoscopy for single use? That's a good question. I think, especially maybe in some of these environments where people have been afraid to go in to get these elective procedures, capsule provides an interesting alternative where you're not necessarily having to go in for a full procedure. I don't think, especially in the space that I work in, especially ERCP, it's just not possible because you can't deliver therapy through the capsule in most cases unless there's new developments that I haven't seen. Capsule is most likely a diagnostic technology, where ERCP is definitely a therapeutic technology delivering, stents and wires and things into the liver and the pancreas. That wouldn't be possible through capsules.
Are the devices being offered of 4K quality, and what is the next advance in this field in terms of that? So Bryan, do you want to take that, or David, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll take that to start. So two things, this is kind of like the other comment, sort of two sides of the coin. So on the one hand, pixel density matters, but it doesn't matter as much as people think after you get to a certain point. If we all think about our experience in sort of, being sold devices at Best Buy, it used to be that, every Father's Day you'd get a new, or at least I'll be gender, directive here, we'd get a new TV for our, to watch the game. And there was a pretty steep curve to be able to, go for new advancements in imaging density and whatnot. Go to Best Buy, I got the latest, greatest. That's really tapered off, right? We've all experienced that. Nobody's really racing to get, a brand new TV every year as it comes out. And part of that is, right, frankly, it's the limitations of our eyes. Just like an iPhone doesn't get smaller because the icons are the size of our fingertips, well, that's a constraint. And the ability for us to actually see detail with our eyes is also, in some respects, a limiter or a constraint. So for us, and all of the research that we've shown is that at some point, and that really is around 1080p and 4K, your eyes just really can't discern the difference between that. What we find is that the more important criteria actually is contrast. That's true not only if you look at the sort of consumer electronics marketing, but true also in a surgical environment. You want to have stark contrast between features on the image, whether it's a ball or a meniscus, and you want to be able to have brightness in the depths and reduction of the overall brightness in the foreground so that you get a good balance of that image. And our software does that as well. So as I touched on, Moore's law continues to advance. We're going to continue to track with that, and we're going to continue to use all the tools in the tool chest. But I would say that, you know, in some respects, we already are at the visualization capability that's well beyond, you know, for most people's discernibility, and we'll continue to track it, but that's not a thing where we feel like there's any deficit today in the current state of the art.
Yeah, I'll just, the only piece I'll add to that, and I agree with everything you just said, is that that's part of the reason we didn't go after colonoscopy. So the scopes used in colonoscopy have to detect some very subtle colon blemishes that could potentially be precancerous. In the procedure that duodenoscopes are used in, it's really just a platform. So the image requirements are not nearly as high. And we think everything we've got is very clinically acceptable, and in some cases, you know, above and beyond what some of the reusable technology was maybe 3 to 5 years ago. So it definitely good enough is I guess how I would describe it.
Great. Here's a couple questions I'm going to combine into one about sort of cost of inventory of single-use devices. How does the price per use compare to current reusable equipment? And have you seen any objections in that regard?
I can start with that one. So from a reusable standpoint, obviously, you know, the longer you make that thing last, I guess, better bang for your buck. What we were actually very fortunate to secure was a pass-through payment from CMS. So we do have, and this is for the entire single-use duodenoscope category. Hospitals do have the ability to charge back a portion of that cost. Doesn't completely eliminate the discussion, but we do expect that, you know, it will be higher. But the way that we kind of look at it is the system is kind of broken right now for the reprocessing. The devices aren't getting clean, so it continues to cost more money to train more people, to create different types of technology, to continue to reuse those scopes. It may be an investment in a flawed process or a failing process anyways. So if you want a definitive answer, it will cost more money. But the idea is, you know, in some cases, that pass-through payment will offset some of that cost.
Yeah, we're in maybe a little different situation on our side of the house. So there are studies that are out there around access to single-use devices that suggest that in the market there's a willingness to pay of about a 5 to 10% cost adder above a premium, if you will, above the comparable cost per procedure for the convenience, for the risk reduction, and everything else there. Our goal, notwithstanding that, is actually to deliver between 5 to 10% of a cost reduction and perhaps even more. So we'll have sort of a 20% plus delta between, you know, willingness to pay for a single-use device versus what our ASPs will actually be. And we think that that's sort of both, well, frankly, first of all, it's a capability in the way that we've engineered the device versus the expense of the incumbent. And we also think in our environment, that's a real part of the value proposition of the changeover from a reusable to a single-use device.
I may jump in here with one or two quick questions to close out, if y'all don't mind. Bryan, I did want to bring up something I think you mentioned either on one of our calls about the automatic reordering process. So obviously a concern is, and David, if you have any thoughts on this, to jump in as well. But if if you run out, if there's any kind of lag in production, right, that's going to be a big problem. And is there an increased cost up front to house all of those things? How does that work? And have you faced any pushback from folks on that?
Yeah, so the genesis of the Pristine Connect platform was to target specifically that, you know, potential risk, if you will, or that, you know, that challenge around logistics. So we recognized early on that, gosh, you know, if you're going to have a surgeon show up on a Monday morning and have a docket full of surgeries lined up, there better be scopes available on the shelf. So we managed that really at the outset. And then we said, gosh, you know, once we've built that capability to do inventory control, and as I mentioned about the safety, right, our scopes, we have a unique device identifier that handshakes with the box. It's not a tremendously sophisticated software program then to manage, you know, the identity of those scopes, the use, the retirement of them, if you will, and then manage an inventory control from that front. So once we built that platform from the inventory management and reordering, automated reordering process, we said, okay, now from that, we can build a whole bunch of interesting additional functionality that I talked about, efficiency enhancing tools, the telehealth and the like. But it was specifically to that good question that was the genesis for us building this, this software in the first place.
Yeah, the only thing our situation is slightly different because we have 25 years of being in those same hospital customers anyways for different types of products. So the question you bring up is true of everything we sell, and so we've kind of got those processes in place already with our customers. Most of our customers are using some type of inventory management software, or the big, I forget what they're called, but the big units where devices are stored, and they can just, as soon as you pull one out, new one comes in. So we're well integrated with the existing process.
Cool. All right. I think we have time for one more question, which is great, because I think we may have actually worked through all of the chat questions. I don't think we got to our other questions, but we got through the chat questions. So one last thing. What percentage of cases in both of your fields, if you know, are reimbursable? So how much of this is coming out of pocket for folks, and how much is working for reimbursement?
Easy on our part, zero. So the way that the expense in our side works for surgery centers and hospital outpatient is that the quote reimbursement for the equipment is done through the omnibus facility fee. So there isn't a specific code for the whether it's durable or reuse or single use for our device. So that's actually kind of simplifies the economic story. And that's part of the reason why, if you've got sort of fixed lump sum that you get overall for the facility fee, part of the reason why we also think it's important to deliver cost savings overall as part of the value prop.
Yeah, and from our standpoint, ERCP is a reimbursed procedure. It's been reimbursed for quite some time. So I believe there's like 11 different modifiers of CPT code, but they all have some reimbursement tied to them.
Okay, Lad, we had one more question come in, but this has got to be the last one. So post-COVID, would ASCs take up a higher percentage of volume than they currently do?
Well, so I think yes, in two respects. Well, we're seeing two phenomena about shift to the ASC. So one is, I think I touched on the perception issue. I don't know whether it's fair or not, but there certainly is a perception that if you're in an ASC, you're in a less, problematic environment than you are in a hospital environment. I don't know that that's appropriate in fact, but it certainly is, I think, a concern, sort of in the greater marketplace. The other phenomena that we're seeing that's really kind of inside baseball is that there actually is a lot of shift of procedures from hospital outpatient to the ASC, particularly in joint replacement. We're in minimally invasive surgery, but that capacity actually shift. There's expected to be between a 2 to 3x increase in the amount of procedures in joint replacement that are moving to ASCs. That's providing a lot of constraint on the sterilization processes internal and the ASCs, which of course are far more limited and less robust. So it's a little bit of a nuance inside orthopedics, but we're seeing really a push to the ASC being a very thematic circumstance for us.
Yeah, I'd just say about 99% of the procedures that this device would work on are currently done in the hospital. And I think it would just be cost prohibitive, not necessarily because of single use, but because of the other technology that you're using to do it in an ASC, with some exceptions. But I would agree with the premise that Bryan shared out.
Okay, I lied. Last one. How does and this is, try to keep this one quick. I know it might actually be a hard one, but how does the functionality compare to traditional, as far as it comes to maneuvering, port access, robotics? Just maybe give it like a quick comparison.
Drop in hand. It's intended to be, gosh, if I had a nickel for every time my surgeon founder said, no give to get, Bryan, no give to get. We're not going to give to get. That has been the mantra since day one of the founding of the company. We did not want to have any concessions that needed to be given by our customers to be able to shift from one durable device to the other. And in fact, obviously, we hope that we're delivering and expect to be delivering more than that. So no give to get. That's the long and short of it.
Same thing. Our procedures, unfortunately, you don't find out what you're getting yourself into until you're too late, you're in. And we did not at all want to be in a position where you have to back out and switch to another device. So all the features, articulation angles, working channel, everything is made to be spot on.
That was actually a really great answer in 1 minute or less. So well done on that one. So I want to say thank you, Bryan, David. This was a fantastic conversation. I think it opens up the possibility for a lot more conversations specifically around this. I know this is something we're going to be talking about moving forward a lot, and there's a lot of opportunity. So thank you both for being willing to share what your companies have been working on. And thank you for being kind of at the forefront of this. It's so important to be thinking about new opportunities and how we improve the face of healthcare, right? And I think that's what we're all hoping for. So thank you, David, Bryan, you all are fantastic. For everyone who stayed with us till the end, we will send out the video of the presentation within 24 hours. So we'll make sure that you all get a copy of it and feel free to share it. But have a great rest of your day, and we'll plan on seeing you all soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Bryan. It was great. Thanks, David.
Bye-bye.